They say you can feel invisible even in a crowded room. But I never truly understood that phrase until I found myself living in a house that was supposed to be mine too. Yet every day I felt like I was trespassing in my own life. My name is Marcella. I'm 55 years old, and 3 years ago, I made what I thought was the most loving decision a mother could make. I sold my house, the small, modest home where I'd raised my daughter alone after my husband passed, where every corner held memories of birthday parties, scraped knees, and bedtime stories, so that my daughter Sophia and her husband Tomas could buy their dream home, a place big enough for their growing family, a place where, they promised, there would always be room for me. "Mom, you'll have your own space," Sophia had said, her eyes bright with excitement as she showed me the floor plans. "The guest room upstairs, it'll be yours. We're a family. We do this together." Together. That word felt warm then. It felt like safety. It felt like I was needed. I was a widow living alone, watching the walls of my small house close in on me with each passing year. The silence there had become unbearable. No husband to share morning coffee with, no child's laughter echoing through the hallways. When Sophia invited me to live with them, it felt like a second chance at family, at belonging. So I signed the papers. I transferred nearly every peso I had. I packed up 30 years of memories into cardboard boxes and told myself this was love in action. This was what mothers did. They sacrificed so their children could thrive. The first few months were beautiful. I helped with my grandchildren, little Emma, who was 6, and baby Lucas, barely 2 years old. I cooked Sophia's favorite meals, the ones I'd made for her throughout her childhood. I kept the house tidy, folded laundry, and made sure dinner was ready when they came home exhausted from work. I thought I was contributing. I thought I was earning my place. But slowly, things began to change. It started with small things. Tomas would come home and find me in the kitchen, and instead of greeting me, he'd sigh, this heavy, theatrical sigh, and say to Sophia, "I thought we'd have some privacy tonight." Sophia would touch his arm gently and say, "Mom's just helping, love." But she never looked at me when she said it. Then came the comments disguised as jokes. "Marcella's been here so long, I'm starting to forget what our house looked like before," Tomas would say with a laugh during family dinners. Everyone would chuckle nervously and I would smile, even though something inside me twisted. The guest who never left, that's what he started calling me. Not to my face, not at first, but I'd hear him saying it to Sophia when they thought I was asleep. I'd hear it through the thin walls that separated my room from theirs. "How much longer is this going to go on?" he'd ask her at night, his voice low but sharp. "She acts like she owns the place." "She helped us buy it, Tomas," Sophia would whisper back, defensive but weak. "Where else would she go? That's not our problem. She made her choice." I would lie there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might crack through my ribs. I wanted to scream. I wanted to march into their room and remind them that I'd given them everything, my home, my savings, my independence, so they could have this life. But I said nothing, because I was terrified that if I spoke up, if I defended myself, they'd ask me to leave. And where would I go? I had no money left, no house to return to, no backup plan. I'd bet everything on this fragile idea of family, and now I was trapped in a home where I was tolerated, not treasured. The children were the only light. Emma would crawl into my lap while I read her stories, her small hands clutching my sleeve like I was the only safe place in the world. Lucas would toddle over with his toys, babbling in that sweet, nonsensical way toddlers do, and for a moment, I'd forget the coldness that had settled into this house like frost, but even that began to change. One afternoon, Emma came to me in tears. "Grandma, why does Daddy say you're always in the way?" My blood turned to ice. "Sweetheart, your daddy didn't mean that," I said, smoothing her hair, my voice steady even as my hands shook. Sometimes grown-ups say things they don't mean when they're tired. But she looked at me with those wide, knowing eyes. Children always know more than we think. And said, "But he says it a lot." That night at dinner, I tried to bring it up gently. "I heard Emma was upset today. Maybe we could all be a little more careful about what we say around the kids." Tomas looked up from his plate. His fork paused midair and smiled. But it wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of a man who'd been waiting for an excuse. "Maybe," he said slowly, "you should worry less about what I say in my own house and more about, I don't know, finding your own place?" The room went silent. Sophia's eyes widened, but she said nothing. Emma looked down at her plate. Lucas, blessedly oblivious, banged his spoon against his high chair. I just meant," I started, my voice barely a whisper. "I know what you meant, Marcella," Tomas interrupted, setting his fork down with a sharp clink. "You meant that you think you have a say here, that you think this is your home too. But let's be clear, you're a guest, and guests don't get to make the rules." I stared at him, my throat tight, my vision blurring with tears I refused to shed in front of him. Sophia finally spoke, but her words were worse than Tomas's cruelty. "Mom, maybe just let it go, okay? Let it go." As if my feelings didn't matter, as if I hadn't given them everything. That night, I lay in bed and realized something that made my stomach turn. I had become a burden. The mother who'd sacrificed everything had been reduced to an inconvenience, a problem to be managed, a presence to be endured. And the worst part? I had nowhere to go. No money, no home, no options. I was trapped in a prison of my own making, and the bars were built from love I'd given to people who no longer knew how to give it back. But I didn't cry that night. Instead, I stared at the ceiling and felt something new stirring inside me. Not sadness, not defeat. It was anger, quiet, slow-burning, patient, and for the first time in 3 years, I thought to myself, this cannot be how my story ends. If you enjoy emotional stories like this one, please subscribe to our channel. We're working hard to reach 1,000 subscribers, and your support means everything. And leave a comment telling us what city you're watching from. Let's build this community together. The weeks that followed felt like walking through a house where all the doors had been quietly locked behind me. I could move through the rooms, but I couldn't really touch anything, couldn't claim anything, couldn't even sit on the couch without wondering if I was taking up someone else's space. Tomas had always been polite when he and Sophia were dating, respectful even. He'd call me Signora Marcella and ask about my day, bring flowers when they came for Sunday dinners at my old house. But respect, I've learned, is sometimes just a performance people give until they get what they want. Now that I lived under his roof, though my money had paid for half of it, the mask had slipped completely. He started leaving his dirty dishes on the counter, right next to the sink, never in it. A small thing, maybe, but it felt deliberate, like a dog marking territory. When I'd wash them without comment, he'd smirk and say to Sophia, "See? Your mom doesn't mind. She likes feeling useful." Useful? As if I were a kitchen appliance. He'd walk past me in the hallway and not say good morning. He'd come home from work and greet the children, kiss Sophia, and look right through me as if I were a piece of furniture. And when I did speak, asking simple questions like, "Should I make enough dinner for everyone?" Or, "Do you need me to pick up Emma from school?" he'd answer in monosyllables or not at all. But Sophia was worse. Because Tomas was cruel, yes, but he was also a stranger in many ways. I'd only known him a handful of years. I could tell myself his coldness came from some flaw in his character, something I couldn't control. But Sophia, I'd carried her in my body. I'd raised her alone after her father died, working double shifts so she could go to a good school, so she could have birthday parties and new shoes and all the things other kids had. I'd been her world, and she'd been mine. Now she barely looked at me. She stopped asking how I slept, stopped inviting me to sit with them in the evenings when they watched television. She'd talk to Tomas in that low, intimate voice couples use, and I'd realize they were making plans. Weekend trips, dinners with friends, renovations to the house. And I was never part of the conversation. One Saturday morning, I woke to the sound of suitcases being zipped. I came downstairs to find Sophia packing the car, Emma and Lucas already buckled into their seats. "Oh, you're up," Sophia said, not quite meeting my eyes. "We're heading to the coast for the weekend." Tomas booked a hotel. I stood there in my nightgown, barefoot on the cold tile, and felt my heart drop into my stomach. "Oh, I didn't know you were planning a trip." "It was last minute," she said quickly. Too quickly. "And, the hotel room only fits the 4 of us." I nodded slowly. "Of course. I understand. But I didn't understand. Or maybe I understood too well. They didn't want me there. They wanted to be a family, the four of them, and I was not part of that equation. I was the leftover piece, the one that didn't fit into the picture they wanted to create. Emma waved at me from the back seat, her little hand pressed against the window. "Bye, Grandma," she called out, her voice muffled by the glass. I waved back, forcing a smile, and watched as they drove away. Then I stood in the driveway for a long time, feeling the morning sun on my face, wondering how I'd become so easy to leave behind. That weekend, the house was mine. I should have felt free, relieved even, but instead, I felt like a ghost haunting someone else's life. I cleaned the kitchen until it sparkled. I organized the children's toys. I washed every window and folded every piece of laundry, as if scrubbing and tidying could somehow make me indispensable. As if perfection could earn me the love I'd once given so freely. When they returned on Sunday night, sunburned and laughing, Tomas walked past me without a word. Sophia gave me a tired smile and said, "Thanks for keeping things tidy, Mom." Then she disappeared upstairs to unpack. "No, we missed you. No wish you could have come. Just thanks for being the maid." The real breaking point came 3 weeks later. It was Sophia's birthday, and I'd been planning for weeks. I baked her favorite cake, tres leches, the same one I'd made for her every year since she was a little girl. I decorated it carefully, writing "Happy Birthday, mi amor," in delicate blue icing. I bought her a small gift with the little money I'd managed to save from the modest pension I received. A silver bracelet with a charm shaped like a heart, engraved with "Mama." I set everything up in the dining room that evening, my hands trembling with anticipation. I imagined her face lighting up, imagined her hugging me the way she used to when she was young, before life got complicated and love got conditional. But when Sophia came home, she wasn't alone. She walked in with Tomas, his mother, his sister, and several friends I'd never met. The dining room table was already set, with catered food from an expensive restaurant, champagne and glass flutes, and a professionally decorated cake that looked nothing like mine. I stood in the kitchen doorway, holding my homemade cake, and felt the world tilt beneath my feet. "Oh, Mom," Sophia said, noticing me. Her voice was strained, embarrassed. "You didn't have to do that." "I wanted to," I said softly. "It's your favorite." Tomas's mother, a sharp-eyed woman named Beatriz who'd never liked me, looked at my cake and then at me with barely concealed disdain. "How quaint," she said, the word dripping with condescension. Tomas laughed. Actually laughed. "Marcella, you know Sophia doesn't eat homemade desserts anymore. She's watching her figure. That's why we ordered from the French bakery." My daughter said nothing. She just looked at the floor. I set my cake down on the counter, carefully, because my hands were shaking so badly I was afraid I'd drop it. I'll leave you all to celebrate." "Good idea," Beatrice said under her breath, though loud enough for me to hear. I walked upstairs to my room, closed the door, and sat on the edge of the bed. The sounds of laughter and clinking glasses drifted up through the floorboards. They were celebrating without me. They were happy without me. And in that moment, I realized something that cut deeper than any insult Tomas had thrown my way. Sophia had chosen him. She'd chosen his family, his approval, his version of their life, and in doing so, she'd unchosen me. I looked at the bracelet I'd bought her, still wrapped in tissue paper on my dresser. The engraving mocked me now. Mama, a title I still held, but a role I no longer played. That night, after everyone had gone home and the house was quiet again, I heard Sophia and Tomas talking in their bedroom. I hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but my room was right next to theirs, and the walls were thin. "Your mother's becoming a problem," Tomas said, his voice low but firm. "She's just lonely," Sophia replied, but there was no conviction in her words. "She's suffocating us. She needs to understand this isn't her house. She's here because we allow it." There was a long pause. Then Sophia's voice, so quiet I almost didn't hear it. "I know." 2 words. That's all it took to shatter whatever hope I'd been clinging to. I lay in the darkness, my chest tight, my mind racing. I'd given them everything, my home, my savings, my pride. And what had I gotten in return? A room I wasn't welcome in. A family that tolerated me out of obligation, not love. But something was shifting inside me. The sadness was still there. Yes, it probably always would be. But underneath it, something harder was forming. Something that tasted like steel. I thought about my mother who'd once told me, "Mija, never make yourself so small that people forget you were ever big." I'd made myself small. I'd shrunk and apologized and tried to earn a place in a family that should have been mine by right. But I was tired of being small. And as I lay there listening to my daughter agree that I was a problem, I made a decision. I wasn't going to beg anymore. I wasn't going to keep hoping they'd remember who I used to be to them. I was going to remind them, not with tears, not with pleas, with something much quieter, much more powerful. I was going to take back my dignity. And they were going to watch. I started paying attention, really paying attention, not to what they said to me. Those words had become predictable, like a script they'd memorized, but to what they said when they thought I wasn't listening, to what they did when they believed I didn't matter enough to notice. It's remarkable what people reveal when they think you're invisible. I'd learned to move quietly through the house, not because I was trying to sneak, but because I'd trained myself to take up less space, to be less of an inconvenience. And in my smallness, I'd become something they'd stopped seeing as a threat. I'd become part of the furniture, background noise, irrelevant. That was their first mistake. One afternoon, I was folding laundry in the utility room when I heard Tomas on the phone in his study. The door was open just a crack, and his voice carried that particular tone men use when they think they're being clever. "Listen, Ricardo, the house appraisal came back higher than we thought. If we refinance now and take out the equity, we're looking at an extra 100,000 easy. We can finally do that renovation, knock down that wall, put in the pool Sophia's been wanting." My hands stilled on the towel I was folding. "What about the old lady?" the voice on the other end asked, tinny through the speaker. "Didn't she put money into the place?" Tomas laughed. It was a cold sound, dismissive. "That was a gift. She has no claim to anything. I made sure of that when we bought it. Her name's not on any of the papers that matter. She's just living here rent-free, really. She should be grateful." A gift. He'd rewritten history so smoothly, so confidently, that I wondered if he'd actually convinced himself it was true. But I remembered. I remembered the day we sat in the lawyer's office, and Tomas had explained that putting my name on the deed would complicate things for tax purposes, for inheritance, for Sophia's future. "Trust me, Marcella," he'd said with that warm smile he used to wear. "This way is better for everyone. You'll always have a home here. That's what matters." And I'd believed him, because I'd wanted to believe him, because challenging him would have meant admitting I didn't trust my own daughter's husband, and what kind of mother doesn't trust her daughter's choice? A stupid mother, apparently. I finished folding the laundry in silence, my mind working through calculations I should have made 3 years ago. Then I went to my room and did something I hadn't done in months. I pulled out the box of documents I'd kept from the sale of my house. There, beneath layers of old tax returns and paid utility bills, I found it. The original agreement we'd signed. The one that outlined my contribution to the down payment. 50,000 pesos. More than half of what was needed. And there, in the small print I'd barely glanced at when I was so eager to help my daughter, was a clause I'd forgotten existed. A right of residency clause. The lawyer, my lawyer, not theirs, had insisted on it. "Just in case," he'd said. I'd thought he was being paranoid. Now I thought he might have been a prophet. The clause stated that in exchange for my financial contribution, I had the legal right to reside in the property for as long as I lived, regardless of ownership changes. It wasn't ownership, but it was something. It was proof that this wasn't charity, that I hadn't just handed over my life savings and hoped for the best. I took photos of every page with my phone. Then I carefully put the documents back and slid the box under my bed. I didn't know yet what I would do with this information, but knowing I had it felt like finding a candle in a dark room. A small flame, but enough to see by. The next incident happened during a family dinner, one of the increasingly rare occasions when we all sat at the table together. Tomas's mother, Beatriz, had joined us again, and she'd brought her usual arsenal of cutting remarks wrapped in false sweetness. "Marcella, dear," she said, passing the bread basket without offering it to me first, "have you thought about finding a little apartment somewhere? I'm sure at your age you'd appreciate having your own space. More independence. You could decorate however you like, invite friends over. She made it sound like a suggestion, like she was doing me a favor. Sophia shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing. Tomas buttered his bread, a small smile playing at his lips. I'm comfortable here, I said quietly. This is my home too. Beatrice's smile tightened. Well, yes, but surely you can see how it might be awkward? Newlyweds need their privacy. And Sophia and Tomas aren't exactly newlyweds anymore, but still, a growing family needs space. You understand. They're not newlyweds, I agreed, my voice steady even though my pulse was racing. They've been married for 8 years. And this house has 4 bedrooms. There's plenty of space. The table went silent. Even the children stopped eating, sensing the tension. Tomas set down his knife with deliberate slowness. Marcella, he said, his voice taking on that patronizing tone he used when he wanted to make me feel stupid. I think what my mother is trying to say is that maybe it's time you started thinking about your future. You can't expect to live here forever. Why not? I asked. The question hung in the air like a challenge. His eyes narrowed. Because this is our house. And my money helped buy it. Sophia's head snapped up. Mom, it's true, isn't it? I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, and saw her flinch. I sold my home. I gave you 50,000 pesos for the down payment. That's not nothing, Sophia. It was a gift, Tomas said, his voice hardening. You gave it freely. No one forced you. You're right, I said softly. No one forced me. I gave it because I loved my daughter, because I believed I was investing in our family, our future together. Well, people's circumstances change, Beatrice interjected, her voice sharp now, the pretense of sweetness abandoned. You can't expect them to take care of you forever, just because you made a poor financial decision. The words hit like a slap. A poor financial decision. As if loving your child was a mistake that came with consequences you deserved to suffer. I stood up slowly, my chair scraping against the floor. Every eye at the table was on me. Excuse me, I said. I seem to have lost my appetite. I walked to my room with my back straight and my head high, even though my legs were trembling. Behind me, I heard Beatrice's voice. She's so dramatic. I don't know how you two put up with it. And Sophia's response, so quiet I almost missed it. She'll get over it. She always does. That night, I didn't cry. I was beyond tears now. Instead, I sat at the small desk in my room and began making a list. I wrote down every conversation I'd overheard, every dismissive comment, every time they'd made plans without including me, every moment of casual cruelty disguised as practical concern. I wrote down the name of the lawyer who'd handled the sale of my house. I wrote down the names of Sophia's aunts, my sisters, who I'd stopped talking to because Tomas had convinced Sophia that family gatherings were too stressful and not worth the drama. Women who'd asked about me, worried about me, and whom I'd pushed away because I didn't want to burden anyone with the truth of how small my life had become. I wrote down the value Tomas had mentioned on the phone, 100,000 pesos in equity. And I wrote down something else, something I'd been too afraid to acknowledge until now. I deserve better than this. The next morning, Emma came to my room before school. She was carrying a drawing, a picture of our family, stick figures holding hands in front of a house. She'd drawn me too, but I was off to the side, separated from the others by a gap of white space. Do you like it, Grandma? She asked, her voice hopeful. I looked at that gap, that emptiness between me and the rest of them, and realized my granddaughter had captured something I'd been feeling but couldn't name. It's very honest, sweetheart, I said, kissing her forehead. You're a wonderful artist. After she left for school, I looked at that drawing for a long time. Then I folded it carefully and put it in the box with my documents. Evidence. Not legal evidence, maybe, but emotional evidence. Proof that what was happening wasn't just in my head. That I wasn't being dramatic or oversensitive or any of the other words they used to make me doubt my own reality. I was being erased. Slowly, methodically, they were writing me out of their story. But what they didn't understand, what they couldn't understand because they'd never bothered to really know me, was that I had always been the author of my own life, and I wasn't finished writing yet. The days began to blur together after that dinner. I moved through the house like a shadow, watching my own life from a distance, as if I were observing someone else's tragedy unfold on a screen. I cooked meals no one thanked me for. I cleaned rooms that were dirtied again within hours. I existed in the gaps between their lives, filling space, but never really occupying it. And the silence. God, the silence was louder than any argument could ever be. Sophia stopped making eye contact with me entirely. She'd enter a room, see me there, and her face would do this thing. This tiny flinch like I was an unpleasant reminder of something she'd rather forget. Then she'd busy herself with her phone or suddenly remember an errand that needed running or call out to Tomas about something trivial, anything to avoid acknowledging my presence. It's a special kind of pain, being avoided by the person you gave life to. I started eating my meals alone, long after everyone else had finished. I'd wait until the kitchen was empty, heat up whatever leftovers remained, if there were any, and sit at the table by myself, chewing food that tasted like cardboard, because loneliness has a way of stealing flavor from everything. One evening, I came downstairs to find the family gathered in the living room, watching a movie together. Emma was curled up next to Sophia on the couch. Lucas was in Tomas's lap, and they were all laughing at something on the screen. The lamp cast a warm glow over them, and for a moment, they looked like one of those perfect family portraits you see in magazines. I stood in the doorway, uncertain. Part of me wanted to join them, to sit in the empty armchair and pretend I belonged to this picture. But another part of me, the part that had learned to read the room, to sense when I wasn't wanted, told me to turn around and go back upstairs. I must have made a sound because Tomas glanced over his shoulder and saw me standing there. "Do you need something?" he asked, his voice flat, annoyed at the interruption. No, I gestured vaguely toward the kitchen. I was going to make some tea. "Well, could you do it quietly?" He turned back to the screen. "We're trying to watch this." Sophia didn't even turn around. I made my tea in silence, the kettle's whistle feeling like a scream I was holding inside, and carried it back to my room. Through the floor, I could hear their laughter continuing, uninterrupted by my absence. They hadn't noticed me arrive, and they didn't notice me leave. I might as well have been a ghost. That night, lying in bed, I thought about all the years I'd spent alone after my husband died. I'd grieved him deeply, missed him every single day, but I'd never felt as lonely then as I did now. Because back then, even in my solitude, I'd had dignity. I'd had my own space, my own choices, my own life. Now I had nothing, not even my daughter's love. The next morning, I woke to find a note on the kitchen counter. Sophia's handwriting, rushed and impersonal. "Mom, we're having the locks changed today. The locksmith will be here at noon. Make sure you're home to let him in. Sorry, no explanation. No, sorry for the inconvenience. Just an order." When the locksmith arrived, a young man with kind eyes and oil-stained hands, he asked me which doors needed new locks. "All of them, apparently," I said, trying to keep my voice light, even though something heavy was pressing against my chest. He worked for 2 hours, replacing every lock in the house. Front door, back door, side entrance, even the door to the garage. When he finished, he handed me a single key. "The family gets the others?" I asked. "Yeah, they'll get 3 sets. You get 1. He paused, studying my face with something that looked like sympathy. "You okay, ma'am?" I forced a smile. "Of course. Thank you for your work." After he left, I stood in the hallway, holding that single key, and understood what had just happened. This wasn't about security. This was about control, about making sure I knew every single time I entered or left this house that I was here by their permission only, that I could be locked out whenever they decided. I went to my room and added this to my list. Changed all locks, gave me 1 key. The evidence was piling up, though I still wasn't sure what I was going to do with it. I only knew that documenting everything made me feel less crazy, less like I was imagining the systematic way they were dismantling my place in this family. 2 weeks later, Sophia's birthday came around again. I'd learned my lesson from last year. I didn't bake a cake, didn't buy a gift, didn't even mention the date. I waited to see if anyone would acknowledge that I existed enough to be included in whatever they'd planned. The morning of her birthday, I heard them whispering in the kitchen. When I came downstairs, they went silent. "Good morning," I said. "Morning," Sophia replied without looking up from her coffee. I poured myself a cup and sat at the table. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Finally, Tomas cleared his throat. "We're going out tonight. For Sophia's birthday. My parents are taking us to that new steakhouse downtown." I nodded slowly, waiting for the invitation that I knew wouldn't come. It didn't. "That sounds lovely," I said, my voice steady even though my hands were trembling. "I hope you all have a wonderful time." Sophia's eyes flickered toward me, then away. "We will." That evening, I watched from my bedroom window as they all piled into the car. Sophia, Tomas, the children, even Beatrice and her husband. They were dressed up, laughing, excited. Emma's small voice carried up to me. "Is Grandma coming?" I couldn't hear Sophia's response, but I saw her shake her head. Emma looked up at my window. For a moment, our eyes met, and I saw confusion in her face. Sadness. But then Tomas called her name impatiently, and she climbed into the car. They drove away, and I stood there at the window until the taillights disappeared around the corner. I was alone in the house. Completely alone. And I realized, with a clarity that made my knees weak, that this was a test. They were seeing how it would feel without me here, imagining their lives emptied of my presence. And they were probably celebrating. I walked downstairs and stood in the living room, looking at the family photos on the mantel. There were dozens of them. Sophia and Tomas's wedding, the children's baby pictures, holidays and vacations and everyday moments captured and framed. I wasn't in a single one. I'd taken most of these photos myself. I'd been behind the camera, documenting their happiness, their family, their life. But I wasn't part of the frame. I was the invisible recorder of memories I didn't belong to. When had I disappeared? When had I gone from being Sophia's mother to being merely the woman who lived in the spare room? I sat down on the couch, the same couch they'd all been sitting on when Tomas asked if I needed something, when my presence had been an interruption, and I let myself feel everything I'd been pushing down for months. The grief, the betrayal, the humiliation, but also, underneath all of that, something else. Anger. Real anger. Not the hot, explosive kind that burns out quickly. This was cold, patient. The kind of anger that thinks and plans and waits for exactly the right moment. I'd been taught my whole life that good mothers sacrifice, that love means giving everything and expecting nothing, that family comes first, always, even when family treats you like you're disposable. But sitting there alone in that house I'd helped buy, surrounded by evidence of a life I'd been edited out of, I realized something. Sacrifice without respect isn't love, it's exploitation, and I was done being exploited. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the name I was looking for. Miguel Reyes, the lawyer who'd handled the sale of my house, the one who'd insisted on that right of residency clause. I typed out a message. "Mr. Reyes, this is Marcela Fuentes. I need to schedule a consultation regarding the property at 147 Calle Primavera. It's urgent. Please let me know when you're available." I stared at the message for a long moment before hitting send. Once I did this, there would be no going back. This was a declaration, a line in the sand. But I'd already lost everything that mattered. What more did I have to lose? The response came within minutes. "Marcela, of course I remember you. I can see you tomorrow at 10 a.m. And Marcela, I'm glad you reached out." I sat back against the couch cushions and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. Not the desperate, clinging hope I'd been surviving on. The hope that if I was good enough, quiet enough, useful enough, they'd love me again. This was different. This was the hope that comes from knowing you still have fight left in you, that you haven't been broken completely, that there's still a chance to reclaim something of yourself, even if it's just your dignity. When they came home that night, full of expensive food and birthday joy, I was in my room with the door closed. I heard them laughing as they put the children to bed, heard Sophia and Tomas talking in low voices about what a perfect evening it had been, and I smiled in the darkness, because tomorrow, everything was going to change. Tomorrow, I stopped being the victim of my own generosity. Tomorrow, I reminded them that quiet women aren't weak women. We're just women who've been choosing our battles. And I'd finally chosen mine. Miguel Reyes hadn't changed much in 3 years. He was still the same composed man with silver hair and reading glasses perched on his nose. But when he looked up from his desk and saw me standing in his office doorway, something shifted in his expression. Not pity. I'd seen enough of that to recognize it instantly. But recognition. The kind that says, "I knew this day would come." "Marcella," he said, standing to shake my hand. His grip was firm, respectful. "Please sit down. Tell me what's happened." I sat in the leather chair across from his desk, the same chair I'd sat in 3 years ago when I'd signed away my financial security in the name of love. Back then, I'd been so eager, so naive, so certain that family meant safety. Now I knew better. "I need to know what rights I have," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Regarding the house, the one I helped my daughter and son-in-law purchase." Miguel leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. "Tell me everything." So I did. I told him about the voice messages I'd overheard, about Tomas's plan to refinance and extract equity from a house I'd made possible. I told him about the locks being changed, about being excluded from family events, about the gradual erasure of my existence from their lives. I told him about sleeping in a room that felt more like a cell than a home, about eating alone, about being treated like an obligation rather than a person. My voice didn't break, not once, because I wasn't asking for sympathy. I was asking for options. When I finished, Miguel removed his glasses and cleaned them slowly, deliberately. "I'm going to be very honest with you, Marcella. When you came to me 3 years ago, ready to give your daughter everything, I tried to warn you. Do you remember?" I nodded. I did remember. He'd asked me multiple times if I was certain, if I understood the risks, if I'd considered keeping some financial independence. And I'd smiled and told him I trusted my daughter completely. "I remember," I said quietly. "I remember you telling me to protect myself. I didn't listen." "No, you didn't. But you also didn't completely ignore me, and that's what matters now." He pulled a file from his cabinet, my file, apparently kept all these years, and opened it. "Do you remember the right of residency clause I insisted we include?" "Yes. I found the documents last week." "Good, because that clause is enforceable. It states that you have the legal right to reside in that property for the remainder of your life, regardless of ownership changes, sale, or refinancing. It's registered with the property deed. They can't remove you without your consent." I felt something loosen in my chest. "So they can't force me to leave?" "Not legally, no. And more importantly, they can't refinance the property or sell it without your signature. The clause requires your written consent for any major financial transactions involving the property." I stared at him. "They don't know this, do they?" "I'm guessing not. When we drew up the papers, the clause was buried in the legal language. Most people don't read every line. They see standard residency agreement and assume it's just formality. But it's not. It's leverage, Marcella. It's power. Power." The word tasted foreign on my tongue. I hadn't felt powerful in so long I'd forgotten what it was supposed to feel like. "What can I do with this?" I asked. Miguel smiled, and it wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of a lawyer who enjoyed watching justice unfold. "You can do several things. First, you can inform them of the clause and watch them realize they're not as in control as they thought. Second, you can block their refinancing plans until they agree to treat you with the respect you deserve. Or third," he paused, his eyes meeting mine, "you can demand your fair share of the equity they're trying to extract. You contributed 50,000 pesos. The house has appreciated significantly. You're entitled to compensation." My heart was pounding now. "How much?" "Based on current market values and your percentage of the initial investment, I'd estimate your share of the equity would be around 65 to 70,000 pesos. Possibly more if we factor in compound appreciation." 70,000 pesos. Enough to start over. Enough to find my own place, rebuild my independence, reclaim my life. "But there's another option," Miguel continued, his voice softening slightly. "One that doesn't involve money. You could use this leverage to renegotiate your place in that family, to demand the respect and consideration you should have been given all along. Sometimes the threat of financial consequences is enough to make people remember their humanity." I thought about Sophia, about the daughter I'd raised, the woman I'd sacrificed everything for. Part of me still hoped that somewhere inside her was the little girl who'd once crawled into my lap and told me I was her whole world. But another part of me, the part that had been growing stronger every day, Knew that some things, once broken, can't be repaired with hope alone. I need to think about this, I said. Of course. Take all the time you need. But Marcella, Miguel's expression turned serious. Whatever you decide, don't let them make you feel guilty for protecting yourself. You gave them everything. They gave you nothing. That's not love. That's theft. I left his office with copies of all the relevant documents and a clarity I hadn't felt in years. I had options. I had power. And most importantly, I had proof that I wasn't crazy, wasn't being dramatic, wasn't imagining the cruelty I'd endured. I had rights. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in months. I called my sister, Patricia. We'd drifted apart over the years, partly because Tomas had always made family gatherings uncomfortable, partly because I'd been too ashamed to admit how small my life had become. Marcella? Her voice was surprised, concerned. My God, I've been worried about you. You disappeared. I know, I'm sorry. I need to talk to you. Come over. Right now. I'll make coffee. Patricia's house was modest but warm, filled with the comfortable clutter of a life actually being lived. Photos everywhere, books stacked on tables, her husband's work boots by the door. We sat in her kitchen and I told her everything. Unlike Sophia, Patricia didn't look away. She didn't make excuses. She listened, and her face grew harder with every sentence. When I finished, she reached across the table and gripped my hand. You're not going back there. I have to. My things. Then we'll get your things. But Marcella, you can't keep living like that. You're killing yourself for people who don't even see you. She's my daughter, I whispered. And you're her mother, which means she should be protecting you, not tolerating your abuse. Patricia's eyes were fierce. When did she forget that? I didn't have an answer. That evening, I returned to the house with a different posture. I wasn't slouching anymore, wasn't trying to make myself smaller. I walked through the door with my head up and went straight to the kitchen, where Sophia was preparing dinner. She glanced at me, then back to her cutting board. Where were you all day? I had appointments, I said simply. Oh. She continued chopping vegetables. Well, dinner will be ready in 30 minutes. I watched her for a moment. This stranger who looked like my daughter but didn't act like her anymore. Sophia, we need to talk. Can it wait? I'm busy. No, it can't. Something in my tone made her stop. She set down the knife and turned to face me, her expression wary. What's going on? Do you know about the right of residency clause in the property deed? Her face went blank. What? The clause that gives me legal right to live here. The one that requires my signature for any refinancing or sale of this property. I watched the color drain from her face. I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, you do. Or at least Tomas does. He's been planning to refinance, hasn't he? To pull out equity for renovations. Sophia's mouth opened and closed. How did you? I heard him on the phone, weeks ago, talking about how I have no claim to anything, how my contribution was just a gift. I kept my voice calm even. But it wasn't a gift, Sophia. It was an investment. In our family. And I have legal documentation to prove it. She stared at me like she was seeing me for the first time in years. What are you saying? I'm saying that things are going to change. Either you start treating me like a member of this family with dignity and respect, or I block your refinancing plans and demand my fair share of the equity I'm entitled to. You can't. I can. I've already spoken to my lawyer, the same one who protected me 3 years ago when I was too blinded by love to protect myself. Tomas appeared in the doorway, his face dark. What's going on? I turned to face him, and for the first time in 3 years, I didn't look away. I'm renegotiating my place in this family. His jaw tightened. You don't have a place to negotiate from? Actually, I said, pulling the documents from my bag and setting them on the counter. I do. He snatched them up, his eyes scanning the pages. I watched the realization hit him, watched his confidence crumble as he understood that I wasn't the helpless old woman he'd convinced himself I was. This is blackmail, he said finally. No, this is justice. There's a difference. Sophia was crying now, quiet tears streaming down her face. Mom, please, we can work this out. Can we? I looked at her, really looked at her. Because for 3 years I've been waiting for you to work it out. Waiting for you to notice that I've been disappearing. Waiting for you to choose me just once. I do choose you. You don't. You haven't. Not when he called me names. Not when his mother insulted me. Not when you left me out of your birthday celebration. Not when you changed the locks and gave me one key like I was a tenant in a house I helped buy. My voice was still steady, but there was steel in it now. I have been invisible in this house. And I'm done being invisible. The silence that followed was absolute. Somewhere in the house, I could hear the children playing, their laughter a reminder of what I'd been holding on to all this time. But I wasn't holding on anymore. I was letting go of the hope that love alone would save me. And I was holding on to something much more valuable, myself. The days following my confrontation were filled with a tension so thick you could taste it. The house felt different now, not because anything physical had changed, but because the power dynamic had shifted, and everyone knew it. Tomas avoided me completely. He'd leave a room when I entered it, take his coffee upstairs instead of drinking it in the kitchen, communicate with Sophia in whispers behind closed doors. His silence was different from before, though. Before, he'd ignored me because he thought I was beneath his notice. Now, he was avoiding me because he finally understood I was a threat. Sophia, on the other hand, couldn't seem to decide how to act around me. One moment, she'd try to be pleasant, asking if I needed anything, commenting on the weather with forced cheerfulness. The next moment, she'd revert to cold distance, as if remembering that I was now her adversary rather than her compliant mother. I watched this performance with a strange sense of detachment. It was like seeing someone I'd once known very well from across a great distance, recognizable but fundamentally changed, or perhaps revealing what had always been there beneath the surface. 3 days after our confrontation, Sophia knocked on my bedroom door. It was late afternoon and I was reading, something I'd started doing again, reclaiming small pleasures I'd abandoned in my attempts to be useful and unobtrusive. "Mom, can we talk?" I set down my book and gestured to the chair by the window. She sat, her hands twisting in her lap, a nervous habit she'd had since childhood. "I've been thinking," she began, not meeting my eyes, "about what you said, about how we've been treating you." I waited. I'd learned the power of silence. "And I want you to know that I never meant to make you feel unwelcome. This is your home, too. You're my mother." Her voice cracked slightly. "I love you." The words should have melted me. A week ago, they would have. I would have rushed to reassure her, to smooth things over, to sacrifice my dignity for the illusion of peace. But now I heard what she wasn't saying. She hadn't apologized. She hadn't acknowledged specific wrongs. She'd just offered vague reassurances designed to make me back down without them having to change anything. "Do you?" I asked quietly. "Love me?" She looked up, startled. "Of course I do. How can you even ask that?" "Because love isn't just a word, Sophia. It's actions. It's consideration. It's making sure the person you love doesn't feel invisible in their own home." I leaned forward. "When was the last time you asked me how I was feeling?" Really asked, and waited for an honest answer. She opened her mouth, then closed it. The silence stretched between us. "You love the idea of me," I continued. "The mother who gives and sacrifices and never asks for anything in return. But the real me, the woman who has needs and feelings and dignity, you stopped seeing her a long time ago." "That's not fair," she whispered. "You don't know how hard it's been. Tomas's mother is always criticizing me, saying I'm not a good enough wife. He works such long hours and I'm exhausted with the kids and you took it out on me." My voice was gentle but firm. "You made me the place where you could exercise the control you don't have anywhere else in your life. I became the problem you could solve by pushing away." Tears rolled down her cheeks. "I didn't mean to. I know you didn't. That's what makes it so painful." She wiped her face with the back of her hand, and for a moment she looked like the little girl she'd been, the one who'd come to me with scraped knees and hurt feelings, trusting that I could fix everything. But I couldn't fix this. This was something she had to fix herself. "What do you want from us?" she asked finally. "Tell me how to make this right." I'd been thinking about this question for days, turning it over in my mind during long, sleepless nights. What did I want? Money? An apology? A return to some imagined past where we were close? "I want to be treated like a person," I said. "Not a guest, not a burden, not a problem to be managed. I want to eat meals with my family without feeling like I'm intruding. I want to be included in decisions that affect me. I want my grandchildren to know me, really know me, not just as the old woman in the spare room. Okay, she said quickly. Yes, we can do that. And I want Tomas to apologize. To my face. For every insult. Every dismissive comment. Every time he made me feel worthless in my own home. Her face fell. Mom, he's not going to. Then nothing changes. I stood up, ending the conversation. I'm not negotiating my basic human dignity, Sophia. Either he respects me, or I follow through with what my lawyer advised. I'll block the refinancing and demand my share of the equity. And you'll have to explain to his parents why their renovation plans fell through. She stood too, her face pale. You'd really do that? Destroy our financial plans? You destroyed my life, I said simply. I'm just protecting what little I have left. She left without another word, and I returned to my book. But I couldn't focus on the words anymore. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of standing firm, of refusing to fold. That evening I heard them arguing. Their voices carried through the walls, sharp and accusing. She's insane, Tomas hissed. You need to handle your mother. How? She has legal rights. Your lawyer confirmed it when I called. Then we'll find a way around it. There's always a way. There isn't, Tomas. The clause is airtight. We need her signature for the refinancing. Without it, the bank won't process the loan. A long silence. Then, fine. I'll talk to her. You need to apologize. Like hell I will. Then we lose 70,000 pesos in equity and the chance to do the renovations. Your mother will never let you hear the end of it. Another silence, longer this time. Then the sound of something hitting a wall. His fist, probably, and footsteps storming away. I lay in bed that night and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Satisfaction. Not joy, exactly. Not happiness. But the deep satisfaction of knowing I'd stood my ground and they'd blinked first. The next morning, I woke early and went to the kitchen to make coffee. Emma was already there, sitting at the table with a bowl of cereal, her legs swinging beneath the chair. Good morning, sweetheart, I said, kissing the top of her head. Morning, Grandma. She looked up at me with those serious eyes. Are you going away? My heart clenched. What makes you ask that? I heard Mommy crying last night. She said you might leave. I sat down next to her and took her small hand in mine. I'm not planning to go anywhere, but I am asking your parents to treat me better. Do you understand that? She nodded slowly. Like when I told Tommy at school to stop calling me names? Exactly like that. Sometimes we have to stand up for ourselves, even when it's hard. Did Daddy call you names? The question was so innocent, so direct, that I didn't know how to answer without damaging her relationship with her father. Children should be allowed to love their parents without carrying adult burdens. Your daddy and I have some things to work out, I said carefully. But that's between grown-ups. You don't need to worry about it. She studied my face for a long moment, then hugged me fiercely. I don't want you to leave, Grandma. You're the only one who reads to me and makes pancakes the right way. I held her tight, breathing in the strawberry scent of her shampoo, and felt my resolve strengthen. I was doing this not just for me, but for her too, because she needed to see that women don't have to accept poor treatment just to keep the peace. That dignity matters. That love without respect is hollow. I'll always be your grandma, I whispered into her hair, no matter what happens. That afternoon, Tomas finally came to me. I was in the garden, a small patch of earth I'd been tending, growing herbs and flowers that no one else seemed to notice or care about. It was my space. The one place in this property that felt like mine. He stood at the edge of the garden, hands in his pockets, his jaw tight. We need to talk. I didn't stand, didn't stop weeding. I'm listening. This situation has gotten out of hand. You're being unreasonable. I pulled up another weed, shook the dirt from its roots. Am I? You know you are. We've given you a place to live, food to eat, included you in our lives. And this is how you repay us? With threats and legal maneuvers? I set down my gardening tool and looked up at him. You gave me a room in a house I helped buy. You fed me leftovers when there were any. And you included me in nothing. I stood up, brushing dirt from my knees. I'm not being unreasonable. I'm being heard for the first time in 3 years. His face reddened. I'm not going to apologize for how I run my household. Then you're not going to get my signature on your refinancing papers. You're willing to hurt Sophia over your pride? I'm willing to protect myself from people who've been hurting me for years. I met his eyes steadily. And let's be clear, you're the one hurting Sophia by refusing to treat her mother with basic human decency. This could all end tomorrow if you'd just admit you were wrong. He stared at me for a long moment, and I could see the calculation behind his eyes. He was weighing the cost of his pride against the cost of losing that equity, that pool, that status symbol he'd been planning. Fine, he said finally, the word bitter in his mouth. I apologize for any offense I may have caused. Not good enough. I crossed my arms. I want a real apology. Specific. For calling me the guest who never left. For changing the locks and giving me one key. For every dinner where you made me feel like I was intruding. For treating me like I was worthless. His hands clenched into fists. You're enjoying this. No, I said honestly. I'm surviving this. There's a difference. We stood there in the garden, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the grass, and I realized this was it. This was the moment where he'd either break or I would. And I'd already decided. I wasn't breaking. Not anymore. Finally, through gritted teeth, he began. I apologize for calling you the guest who never left. And for making you feel unwelcome in your own home. Each word sounded like it was being pulled from him with pliers. But I didn't care. I'd stopped caring about his comfort the moment I'd decided to care about my own dignity. And, I prompted, and I'll treat you with more respect going forward. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't heartfelt. But it was something. Thank you, I said simply. He turned and walked away, his shoulders rigid with suppressed rage. I returned to my weeding, and for the first time in 3 years, I smiled while doing it. For 2 weeks after Tomas's forced apology, an uneasy truce settled over the house. They included me in meals now, though the conversations were stilted and awkward, everyone carefully avoiding topics that might ignite conflict. Tomas spoke to me in clipped formal sentences, like a businessman conducting unavoidable transactions with someone he'd rather not deal with. Sophia tried too hard, overcompensating with bright smiles that didn't reach her eyes. But something had fundamentally changed. I'd stopped waiting for their approval. I'd stopped shrinking myself to fit into spaces they'd carved out for me. I existed in that house not as a grateful recipient of their charity, but as someone with rights, with voice, with power. And it terrified them. I could see it in the way Tomas watched me when he thought I wasn't looking, calculating, wary, like a man who'd underestimated an opponent and was now trying to figure out his next move. I could hear it in Sophia's voice when she asked me questions. That careful tone people use when they're afraid of triggering something they don't understand. They'd wanted me compliant and invisible. Instead, they'd created someone who'd learned to see clearly. The real breaking point came on a Tuesday evening, 3 weeks after my confrontation. I was setting the table for dinner when I heard voices in the driveway, not just Tomas coming home from work, but other voices. Unfamiliar ones. Through the window, I saw him standing with 2 people, a man in an expensive suit carrying a leather briefcase, and a woman with perfectly styled hair holding a tablet. Real estate agents. I recognized the look immediately, that polished, professional veneer people wear when they're about to sell you something or sell something of yours. My chest tightened. I walked to the front door and opened it just as they were about to enter. Marcella, Tomas said, his voice falsely cheerful. These are associates of mine. We're just going to look at some renovation plans in my office. Renovation plans that require walking through every room of the house? I asked, watching the agents exchange glances. The woman stepped forward with a practiced smile. Mrs. Fuentes, I'm Diana Castellanos, and this is my colleague Roberto. We're actually here to provide a market valuation of the property, standard procedure for refinancing. Without informing me first? I looked at Tomas. Interesting approach. His jaw tightened. It's just a valuation. Nothing that requires your involvement. Everything about this house requires my involvement. I didn't move from the doorway. As you've been made aware. Roberto cleared his throat uncomfortably. Perhaps we should come back another time. No, Tomas interrupted. This is my house. They're coming in. Actually, I said, my voice calm but carrying an edge that made everyone pause. It's our house. And I don't consent to a valuation today. Sophia appeared behind me, her voice tense. Mom, please, don't make a scene. I turned to look at my daughter. I'm not making a scene. I'm exercising my rights. Rights you'd prefer to ignore, apparently. We were going to tell you, Sophia said, but her eyes slid away from mine. We just wanted to get the preliminary numbers first. So you could present me with a fait accompli? Make it harder for me to say no? I shook my head. I'm not that woman anymore, Sophia. The one you could manage and manipulate. You need to understand that. Tomas pushed past me into the house, gesturing for the agents to follow. Come in. She doesn't have the authority to stop this. I pulled out my phone and dialed Miguel Reyes's number. He answered on the second ring. Miguel, I have 2 real estate agents in my home attempting to conduct a valuation without my consent. Can you please explain to them the legal implications of proceeding? I handed the phone to a very uncomfortable Roberto, who listened for about 30 seconds before his face went pale. Yes, sir, I understand. No, we absolutely won't proceed without proper authorization. Yes, I'll inform my client. He handed me back the phone and turned to Tomas. Mr. Fuentes, I'm afraid we can't conduct this valuation without Mrs. Fuentes's written consent. The property has a residency clause that grants her co-decision authority on all financial matters related to the property. That's ridiculous, Tomas snarled. Her name isn't even on the deed. No, but her rights are registered against the title, Diana interjected, having clearly done some quick research on her tablet. This is legally binding. We could face serious liability if we proceed without proper authorization. They left quickly after that, apologizing to me, not to Tomas, and promising not to return without my explicit written approval. The moment the door closed, Tomas exploded. What the hell do you think you're doing? Protecting myself, I said simply. Something I should have done 3 years ago. You're sabotaging our lives. I'm preventing you from sabotaging mine. I walked past him toward the kitchen. There's a difference. He grabbed my arm, not hard enough to hurt, but firm enough to stop me. You need to sign those papers, Marcella. We need this refinancing. I looked down at his hand on my arm, then up at his face. Let go of me. Something in my voice made him release me immediately. Sophia stood frozen in the hallway, watching us with wide, frightened eyes. You want my signature? I said quietly. Then we renegotiate. Everything. My place in this family. My financial security. My dignity. All of it. You're being unreasonable. No, I'm being someone you can't ignore anymore. I pulled out the chair at the kitchen table and sat down. So, let's talk. Really talk. Not with lawyers present, not with agents standing by. Just the 3 of us. Finally being honest. Tomas looked at Sophia, who slowly came to sit at the table. He remained standing, his arms crossed, his face a mask of barely contained fury. I want a formal agreement, I began. One that outlines my rights and responsibilities in this household. I'm not asking for control. I'm asking for respect. What kind of agreement? Sophia asked, her voice small. First, I want my financial contribution to this house acknowledged in writing, not as a gift, but as an investment. If you sell this property, I'm entitled to a proportional share of the proceeds. Tomas scoffed. Absolutely not. Then no signature. No refinancing. No pool. I folded my hands on the table. Second, I want to be included in family decisions that affect me. Vacations, holidays, household changes. I'm part of these conversations, not an afterthought. Fine, Sophia said quickly. That's reasonable. Third, I want an apology. A real one. Not the performance Tomas gave me in the garden. I want acknowledgement of the harm that's been done, and a commitment to repair it. The silence that followed was absolute. Somewhere in the house, a clock ticked. Outside, a car drove past. Normal sounds of normal life continuing while ours hung in the balance. Finally, Sophia spoke, her voice cracking. I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry. I let the situation. I should have protected you. I should have seen what was happening. Tears streamed down her face, and these ones looked real. Not manipulative, not performed, just raw, painful recognition. I was so tired, she continued. So overwhelmed. And it was easier to let him push you away than to fight him. I told myself you understood. that you didn't mind, that you were fine, but you weren't fine, and I knew it. I just didn't want to deal with it. I reached across the table and took her hand. Thank you for saying that. I don't know how to fix this. You start by meaning what you say, by following through, by choosing me when it matters, not just when it's convenient. She nodded, squeezing my hand. I turned to Tomas, who was still standing, still rigid with anger. And you? You want me to grovel? To pretend I was some kind of monster? His voice was tight. I provided for you. I gave you a place to live when you had nowhere else to go. You tolerated me, I corrected. You allowed me to exist in the margins of your life while you took everything I offered and gave nothing back. That's not generosity. That's exploitation. This is insane, he muttered. But there was less conviction in his voice now. What's insane is treating someone who helped you build this life like they're worthless. What's insane is making your wife's mother feel like a burden in her own home. What's insane is thinking you can continue to benefit from my sacrifice without acknowledging it. He stared at me for a long moment, and I could see the war happening behind his eyes, his pride fighting against his practical needs, his ego battling his recognition that I held cards he couldn't ignore. Fine, he said finally, the word bitter. I apologize for making you feel unwelcome, for taking advantage of your generosity, for not seeing what Sophia should have seen, that we owed you more than we gave. It wasn't gracious, it wasn't heartfelt, but it was honest in a way his first apology hadn't been. He was admitting not just that he'd been wrong, but that he'd been deliberately wrong, that he'd known what he was doing. Thank you, I said. Now, let's talk about the agreement. We spent the next 2 hours hammering out details. Miguel joined us by phone, making sure every clause protected my interests while allowing them to move forward with their plans. By the end, we had a document that outlined my right to remain in the house for life, with my own private space that couldn't be violated, my entitlement to 20% of any equity extracted from the property, retroactive to when I made my initial contribution, my inclusion in all major family decisions and financial discussions affecting the household, a monthly contribution from them to a personal account in my name, acknowledging that I'd been subsidizing household expenses from my pension. Most importantly, a clause stating that any violation of these terms would trigger my right to demand full payment of my share of the property's current value. When we finished, Tomas looked like he'd aged 10 years. Sophia looked exhausted, but relieved. And I felt something I hadn't felt in longer than I could remember. I felt like myself again. I'll have my lawyer draw up the formal documents, Miguel said through the speakerphone. Once everyone signs, you can proceed with the refinancing. After he hung up, we sat in exhausted silence. I never wanted it to come to this, Sophia said quietly. Neither did I told her honestly. I wanted you to see me without having to force you to. But sometimes the people we love leave us no choice but to fight for our own survival. She nodded, wiping her eyes. I stood up, feeling the weight of 3 years of accumulated hurt beginning to lift from my shoulders. I'm going to my room. We can sign the papers tomorrow after Miguel prepares them. As I walked away, Sophia called out, Mom? I turned. I really am sorry, and I'm going to do better. I promise. I smiled, a real smile, tired but genuine. Then that's all I can ask. That night, I lay in bed and realized something profound. I'd won. Not in the way revenge fantasies promise, with them destroyed and me triumphant, but in the way that actually matters. I'd won back my dignity, my voice, my sense of self-worth. I'd reminded them, and more importantly, I'd reminded myself that I mattered. And that was everything. 3 months have passed since we signed those papers. 3 months since I stopped being invisible in my own life. The changes didn't happen overnight. They never do. Real transformation is slow, awkward, full of backsliding and uncomfortable adjustments. But they did happen. Tomas still isn't warm with me. I don't expect him to be. But he's respectful now, in a way that feels genuine rather than performative. He asks if I need anything when he goes to the store. He includes me in conversations about household repairs. Last week, when his mother made one of her pointed comments about my presence at a family dinner, he actually defended me. Marcella lives here, Mama, he said firmly. She's family. That's the end of the discussion. His mother's face had been priceless. But more priceless was the look Sophia gave him afterward. Surprised, grateful, relieved that she didn't have to be the only one standing up for me anymore. Sophia has been trying, really trying. She asks about my day and waits for real answers instead of polite deflections. She started inviting me to her book club, introducing me to her friends as her mother, rather than just someone who lives with them. We have coffee together on Saturday mornings now, just the two of us, talking about things that matter. It's not the relationship we had when she was young. That's gone, and mourning it is pointless. But it's something new, something more honest, built on respect rather than obligation, on choice rather than guilt. The money from my share of the refinancing sits in an account with only my name on it. 42,000 pesos. Not as much as Miguel initially estimated, but enough. Enough to know I have options. Enough to know I'm not trapped. Enough to remind me every time I check the balance that I have value beyond what I provide to others. I haven't spent much of it. I'm saving it. Not for anything specific. Just for the knowledge that it's there. That I could leave tomorrow if I needed to. That I'm here by choice now, not necessity. That makes all the difference. Emma asks me to read to her every night now. We sit together in her room, her small body tucked against mine, and I read her stories about brave girls who saved themselves. She listens intently, sometimes asking questions that show she understands more than I give her credit for. "Grandma," she said last night, "were you like the princess in the tower? The one who had to rescue herself?" I smiled and kissed the top of her head. "Something like that, sweetheart. I'm glad you did," she whispered. "I would have been sad if you left." "Me too, baby. Me too." Lucas, now almost 3, has started calling me Lita instead of Grandma, his own invention that makes everyone smile. He brings me his toys to fix, his scraped knees to bandage, his small triumphs to celebrate. In his world, I'm not a problem to be solved or a burden to be managed. I'm just Lita, and that's enough. Last Sunday, we had a family dinner, the whole family, including my sister Patricia and her husband. It was Sophia's idea, a gesture toward rebuilding the connections Tomas had discouraged for so long. Patricia pulled me aside while we were clearing dishes. "You look different," she said, studying my face. "Lighter, somehow." "I feel different," I admitted. "Like I've been carrying something heavy for years and finally set it down." "Good." She squeezed my hand. "You deserve to breathe." I've started tending the garden more seriously now. What began as a small patch of herbs has expanded into raised beds full of vegetables and flowers. Tomas grumbled about the cost of materials until Sophia reminded him that it was my money paying for it, money I'd earned through standing up for myself. Now he just stays out of my way when I'm out there, which is perfect. The garden is mine, the one space in this shared life that belongs entirely to me, where I can dig in the dirt and watch things grow and remember that endings can also be beginnings. I've learned something important these past few months. Dignity isn't something people give you. It's something you claim, something you fight for when necessary, protect fiercely, and never apologize for defending. For too long, I confused love with self-erasure. I thought being a good mother meant making myself smaller so my daughter could be bigger. I thought family meant accepting whatever treatment they offered because blood mattered more than boundaries. I was wrong. Love without respect is just manipulation wearing a gentle mask. Family without accountability is just people taking advantage of proximity. And sacrifice without reciprocity is just another word for exploitation. I'm still here, in this house that my money helped build, with these people who share my blood and my history. But I'm here differently now, not as a ghost haunting the margins of their lives, but as a woman who knows her worth and won't settle for less than she deserves. Sometimes Sophia looks at me with something like wonder, as if she's seeing me clearly for the first time. "I never knew you could be this strong," she said to me last week. "I was always this strong," I told her gently. "You just never needed to see it before." That's the thing about quiet people, about those who sacrifice without complaint, who give without counting the cost. We're not weak. We're patient. We're strategic. We know how to endure, but we also know how to fight when fighting becomes the only path to survival. The voice message that started all this, Tomas's cruel words about finding something better, still exists on an old phone I keep in a drawer. Sometimes I think about deleting it, erasing that evidence of how far we've come from that terrible place. But then I decide to keep it, not to hold on to the hurt, but to remember the moment I chose to stop accepting hurt as my portion. To remember that rock bottom can also be a foundation if you're willing to build something new from it. I'm 55 years old. I've lived through loss and betrayal, through years of making myself invisible in hopes of being seen. I've learned that sometimes the people who should love you most need to be taught how. And I've learned that the most radical thing a woman can do is refuse to disappear. My story isn't unique. Everywhere, there are women like me, mothers, grandmothers, aunts, sisters, who've given everything and been treated like nothing, who've sacrificed their comfort, their security, their sense of self for families who've forgotten to be grateful. If you're one of those women hearing my story, living some version of it yourself, I want you to know this. You are not too old to reclaim your life. You are not too tired to fight for your dignity. You are not asking too much when you demand to be treated like you matter. Because you do matter. Not because of what you provide or how useful you are or how quietly you suffer. You matter because you're human, and humans deserve respect. Period. Stand up. Speak up. Take up space. Make them see you. And if they won't see you willingly, make them see you legally, financially, strategically, whatever it takes. Your dignity is worth fighting for. Trust me. I know. This morning, I woke to sunshine streaming through my window and the sound of Emma's laughter from downstairs. I made my coffee the way I like it, not the way someone else prefers. I sat in my garden and felt the sun on my face and the soil under my fingernails. And I smiled, because I'm not just surviving anymore. I'm living, and that, after everything, feels like the greatest victory of all. I learned that sometimes, the quiet ones don't speak because they're weak. We're quiet because we're listening, learning, waiting. And when we finally speak, the whole world has to stop and pay attention. Because dignity, once awakened, doesn't whisper. It roars.